Hello and welcome to Faith Family Fulfillment, another episode. I'm your co-host Chris,
and I'm Suzanne.
And it's just us. It's been just us for a little while.
Yeah.
And but a pretty special week for you this week. You hit a big number this week. You're not supposed to ask ladies how old they are. But how old are you?
Right now, or how old will I be?
Well, very soon. How old will you be?
I will be 50.
Big 50. And so we're going to look back at the wisdom of 50 years. Can we call it wisdom?
We'll call it experience.
Experience of 50 years. And some takeaways from that.
Hopefully.
Yeah, we'll see. Cool. I'll pray then.
Okay.
Lord, thank you for this opportunity to kind of sit and just reflect. And probably reflect on all the ways that you've shown up throughout the last 50 years. Which is, I know in those stories you always get the glory. I ask you lead and guide this conversation. And that what needs to come from it comes from it, just to glorify you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
So I would say I don't get older. I just get better.
Oh, is that what it is?
Well, I've said that for probably 2.5 decades now, so yes.
Okay, I agree. I don't disagree.
Better.
I don't disagree with that. So part of the reason we started talking about having this actual episode is because last night we threw a little party.
Yes, you did.
In honor of you. And you had done a surprise party for me for my 40th. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, what if I don't make it another 10? So I better take
the optimist.
I better take care of you at 50. So I wanted to give you a little party last night. And but under the pretense of getting you in the building, I had to say we're going to record a podcast.
Yeah.
So I hope that when we talked about it last night, you got some thoughts in your head of how do we look back at decades and say, hey, these are highlights of decades.
Yeah, it does require more than 24 hours of warning to really dive into that, just so you know.
So you had enough warning?
Not really.
Yeah. Well, can we get into it anyway?
Sure.
Cool. So if you had to look at, I think, the first 10 years of your life, I mean, most people, from what I understand, when you talk to people, they don't remember, like, the first 5 years. I think I have a lot. When I ask my mom about things, I have earlier memories than that, but the majority of people don't. But if you had to look at the first 10 years, what would you say was the biggest, like a big impact story from the first 10 years of Suzanne?
I'm boring, right? Just as a premise.
I don't think you're boring.
No, I think probably the biggest thing in the first 10 years of my life was my parents built a new house. And I was in first grade, I think, when we moved in. And it was a house that my dad had physically built, not had built, but had built himself with his hands. And we had been living in a house that it's beautiful now because it's been restored, but it's an older house, like very old. Like no HVAC, essentially. So in the summer you were hot, and in the winter you had fireplaces.
Bundled.
Yeah, well, it's never really all that cold.
Our children would say that's how we make them live now.
Well, they would, but they're very privileged. But that was a big moment because we moved from living, in the same town as my grandparents, and my mom's an only child, so, very kind of close family there. But we went from living several miles away from them to living literally kind of right across the field from them. And then kind of draw a line between our houses and then make a triangle out of that. And that was my great-grandparents were living very, very close. So it was, 3 generations living inside of the same, property, essentially. Ironic, like we are now.
Isn't it ironic, right?
But yeah, I would say it's probably my first 10 years. That was probably the big thing that happened. I got a baby brother, but that wasn't probably, that was non-climactic. Sorry, Matt. But, in the grand scope of things, I was 5 when he was born. So, yeah, it was just kind of like, okay, we have another person in the house. Right.
Gotcha. So moving into a new home with central heat and air, big deal. But moving on to a family property, that was pretty consequential. Do you think that put a, because, you know, we never really talked about that before we got married, about living on the same property as mom and dad and Stephanie and Jonathan. But that's what we do now.
Yes.
We started having that conversation after we got married and had been married for 5 or 6 years. Because we moved in 2008, and we started talking about, if you remember, it was the old farm, and we were all going to build there.
Right.
And that was, so we got married in 96, so it was like 2002, 2003, 2004, somewhere along in there.
Yep.
There was conversation about that.
Yeah.
Do you think your childhood played a role in that? Because
I would love to say yes, but probably not.
Gotcha.
This was a different situation. So, again, my mom's the only child. So, unlike you and Stephanie, like, there was no siblings. Right. My great-grandparents, they had a lot of living children still at that point. So, that was kind of like the gathering hub for all the holidays. But similar but very different. So, you could call both fruit, but, you know,
Gotcha.
Not quite
Different
on.
tree.
Yeah, totally. Well, maybe even a different continent. But just not the same. Right. Just not quite the same. Same thing in terms of, like, open door policy with the grandparents. You know, you go and come as you please, and your mother fusses at you because you're being rude and not knocking and asking for things, but your grandmother just says, no, you can have it.
Yeah, come on in, open the drawer, here's the candy.
Not quite that way, but yes. But, you know, that's exactly the same. We've had those conversations, right? So same in that regard. But just being that close, you know, I mean, we were there a lot. Like, my grandfather farmed and worked, he could fix anything. Not a very educated person, but incredibly smart. And so he farmed, and then he worked second shift in the cotton mill. So we were constantly in their house doing all things like homesteading type things. So,
Gotcha.
Yeah.
About the second 10 years.
Wow. A lot happened in the second 10 years. So I had some really great summer experiences. You would call them nerd camp, but they were awesome.
We both had those.
And some crazy full circle moments we've talked about over the last couple of weeks is people that I met. So I was at Summer Ventures in Boone in the summer of 1990. And it's crazy because some of the folks that I met were from Wilson, which is where you have your business and where I have mine now. Crazy that they're not here anymore, but I am.
Right.
And one of them is the daughter-in-law of a client of mine, unbeknownst to me, one of my first clients that I had when I was here. It's her daughter-in-law. So it's such a small world. And then the other, ironically, I am now in my new office right next door to her dad.
Wow.
And she is in forensic science at VCU, which is what our daughter is doing at Appalachian State, where I was in 1990. So that was fun.
That's a lot of full circle there.
Yeah, right? Kind of like you're connected and you just
don't even know it.
Right, you start drawing lines. Obviously, high school graduation was just a day. Like, it wasn't super exciting. It was just kind of like, yeah, I'm done. I'm gone. College, met you. There's that.
It was a little bit significant.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, here we are, like 3 decades later.
Yeah.
But pivotal, like, life moments. And then, like, looking back now on the connections made that summer. And, like, it's just kind of it's just mind-blowing to a certain extent.
We talked about it today in our Connect group about you just take a second to glance back and you see, like, all the things that God puts in your place and then how they come to fruition over the course of time, you know. So now we're at 20. So from the third 10 years, so 20 to 30.
Wow, a lot happened in that decade.
Right?
Wow, a lot happened. So I graduated from college, started graduate school, got engaged, married, moved, worked for you and your family for a bit. We started a business, or I should say we took over a business. We We didn't have. You had cancer. We had a baby. Did I miss anything? That was a busy 10 years.
It was a crazy busy 10 years.
No wonder I was so tired.
Yeah, you were wore out. So if we look at, like you just named, like all those different highlights, most significant, I would have to say, would be Avery. I mean, she was the first child.
Well, yeah, but if we hadn't gotten married, then we.
Yeah, so married's most significant. Aww.
Well, it'd be a close one. Maybe the kind of tie.
So, looking back at where we are now, you can't, like you said, you can't ignore the getting married part of it. But what do you think about that 10 years shapes who you are now? I think that's what I'm trying to get to. So if you look at the first 10 years, you know, moving onto the property with your grandparents and great-grandparents, and the second 10 years, you know, getting those experiences were away from home, you know, being a teenager,
right,
and still full circling back to a lot of those now. And then that 10 years, ridiculously busy.
Yes.
Took over business, failed that business. Like, that's literally what we did. We flushed it and started our family, got married, all of that, got married, and then started our family. So how do those significant events shape the way you show up now?
We talked about it on previous episodes about all of the I won't call it chaos, but it was just crazy busy around the time when I was in graduate school the first time, and we got married and we moved, and there was just so much change in that moment. And I think the way we phrased it was, you know, you have to look at it in terms of it's preparing you, but you can't not enjoy the moment just because, you know, because then you downplay what you can bring from it. Isn't that how we kind of phrased it in a nutshell? So if I had to go back and look at my 20s and say, okay, what did it teach me? Well, I think it taught me probably home is not a location.
That's really good.
Yeah, because we had several addresses during that time frame. So I say home is not a location. It's more of like a mindset, I think. If you don't quit, you can't be beaten. Oh gosh, what else? Schedules matter. Like putting your kid on one. I think probably if I were to look back and say the big thing that came out of my 20s was just planning and preparation. You have to plan and be prepared, because then you don't get caught off guard.
It's good. Because, I mean, if you look at all those things, I mean, home, the home is not a location, but we did get settled in the next 10 years. So if we look at that fourth set of 10 years from 30 to 40, where you've like had those moments, the decade of chaos, what you called it.
It was just busy.
From 20 to 30.
It's busy.
Learning home's not a location. Don't quit. You can't be beat. Schedules matter. Like that really plays into it today. But what about 30 to 40?
So my 30th year on the planet, we had our second child. And you were traveling a lot. Learn that decade, the big resounding thing. You make me think. Ask another question.
No, that was a hard decade.
It was a very hard decade. It was a very challenging decade. I would say foundationally, if I'd go back and say between 30 and 40, making sure that your foundation is strong was probably the biggest takeaway in that decade.
What do you mean by that?
So make sure you know who you are, and know you are more than you're more than your label. So you're more than a mom, you're more than a wife, you're more than, I was competing a lot, so you're more than a competitor, you're more than a coach, you're more than all of those things. Like, you are those things, but you're so much more than that. And then foundationally, in terms of spirituality, just really, leaning into, what is my identity in Christ? What does the Bible say about all of the crazy that life is going to throw at me? And not wavering from that, just being very firm in that. And again, you can't be beaten if you don't quit. Just you can't quit, but you need to make sure that you're pursuing the right thing.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
I think it would have been very easy during the years that I was competing, because I competed until I was 38. So it would have been very easy to get caught up in that world, because I was doing very well. And that is not a very foundationally strong environment to be in.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It is, it's really terrible when it comes to just your self-worth and your confidence. And if you don't have a good sense of who you are in that space, it will crush you. That's what I mean. Just know who you are. Make sure you're pursuing the right things. Pursuing that, I think, for the reasons that I was doing it, was not about seeking my own glory and edification. It was fun. I enjoyed it. It was a challenge. But I never got so wrapped up in the look at me aspect that a lot of competitors do.
So what do you think those years of competing were rooted in? I mean, like, we both competed the first time once we started to own the gym. Like, I had never competed. You had never competed until we bought the gym. And I knew I did it as a way to, like, really get the word out there that we had this gym, and it was a worthwhile gym because people competed. Like, there were a lot of people out of that gym that competed at the state level
and did well.
Like, they were competitive. But you competed way more than I did. What do you think the driving force behind that was during that decade? Because we just talked about how hard of a decade it was for a multitude of reasons, right?
Yeah.
It was not an easy decade for our marriage. It was just not easy. Like, we failed a business in that decade. Like, there's a lot that happened in that decade. So where do you think the root of, you just said it, competitive is not a head healthy space to be in if you don't watch what you're chasing. So.
But it's a challenge. It's very much a challenge. And it's always interesting to see, okay, if I put forth X effort, I should get Y result, which is not always the case. So you have to figure out what works for you. But I think during that decade for me, it was a way to maintain focus and not be distracted by all the other things that were trying to crowd into my mental space. Okay, I know for this 16 weeks, I need to do these things. And this is going to give my day structure and routine beyond chasing after babies and, getting people to and from preschool and, all the things that they were doing. This is going to be something that I can do for me that is going to challenge me and is going to keep me focused and not allow some of the other outside things to take root. Because if you're busy doing other things, then all that outside external negativity doesn't really have anywhere to go because you just don't have time for it.
Right. And it's funny, Andy's got 75 hard, and everybody thinks it's a quote-unquote fitness challenge. In reality, it's a mental discipline challenge. That's what it is. Because it's
a mental fitness.
It's a mental fitness. And it's funny because one of the reasons I said I would never do it, I was like, well, I've competed. I don't think it'll be any harder than 16 weeks worth of competing. I don't know that it's harder, but it's different. But
I would agree.
But there's a lot of similarities.
Very much.
Because for me, competing was never about the physical challenge. It was about the mental structure. I actually became more disciplined with everything in my life when I had that thing going on.
Right.
So So you think for you that's what it was? Just mental distraction or mental discipline or both?
I think it kept the mental distractions away.
Gotcha.
Because one of the things when I'm coaching people now, I tell them all the time, look, if you're finding yourself getting into a mental headspace where you are tracking down rabbit trails, perpetual rabbit trails, and you're just circling around, you have all of these what if moments going on in your brain, then you don't have it's not a mental like headspace problem. You have a busyness problem. Get up and go do something. Because if you're having time to sit and let your brain do all of this extra what ifs, that is nothing good is going to come out of that. Number one, overthinking never leads to a positive end.
Correct.
So I tell them, get up and go get busy. What do you mean by that? Just go move. Leave your phone, go walk around the building. If you do nothing else, just go walk around the building. It will squash that mental echo that you have going on.
You spoke about being rooted in finding what you're rooted in, like your identity. Like that was the decade for you where you think you got the most rooted in figuring out your identity.
I think I didn't have a choice in that decade.
Tell me why.
We don't have enough time for that.
Yeah, we do.
We really don't.
Here's the highlights.
Again, you can get lost in what the world tells you that you are. You can get lost in what your spouse tells you that you are or aren't. You know? So figuring out who am I matters. Because whatever you put behind I am, whether it is good, bad, or indifferent, is true. Because your brain is going to say, okay, I am unworthy, not good enough, whatever. You have to have a different viewpoint. You know, I am strong. I am capable. You start there. But then you have to go, okay, well, I'm all of these things, but what am I meant to be? And I think that was the decade where I was kind of like, okay, well, I've done these things. I've gotten to this point. Okay, now what? Because we've talked about it before. I am not cut from the cloth to be a stay-at-home anything. I would think I would lose my mind. I need people. I'm an introvert, but I need people. And finding a way to take what I knew, take what I was good at, and okay, now what can I do with that? So there was a whole lot of figuring things out during that decade.
Cool. So the decade you're coming out of, the one leading up to Tuesday, you turn 50 this coming Tuesday.
I do.
Of course, by the time this drops, it'll be this past Tuesday. You've taken this time to went through the decade of chaos. You decided who you were. How did that lead into who Suzanne was between 40 and 50?
So, got a master's degree, worked in a clinic, was able to apply some of the things that I'm good at in those spaces. Knew that wasn't the end. Decided to work on a doctorate. What else have I done? That was a big one. That took a lot of time. That took the majority of this decade. No, I would say this is the decade where I think all the puzzle pieces started out for the first half maybe as just being like you find the corners and the edges. And as we've gotten, to this point now, like the middle is, like I can see a picture now.
Tell me about that.
So if you look back over, I would just say from like 20 to now, because all the stuff before that, I mean, yes, that was important. Yes, it gave me some direction. But I can't really pull a whole lot from that because, I mean, you're still learning, like, so much. You're still in the learning mode. You don't really get to apply. But if I look at the last 3, then I can go, okay, looking back, I can pull from that experience and use that to help somebody else. I can pull from that experience and use that to help somebody else. And while you're going through it, even if you're listening and you are in that crazy 20 to probably 35 year, window of your life, everything that is happening to you, you are going to look back on probably quicker than you think and go, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that happened because now I know whatever. And you can start applying it. So I think it's all the things up to this point now make sense in the bigger scope.
So, like you said, you spent the majority of this past decade educating or getting educated, right? Or solidifying education. Because, I mean, you had been in that space, coaching space, and like natural medicine. You had been all in that on your own.
Yes.
But, like, finding a way to, hey, how do we turn that into something?
Right.
Having raised 3 children to the point of,
2 of them are adults.
2 of them are adults.
They're still on our payroll.
Yeah, one of them feels like she's an adult.
Yeah.
But like, even using the experience of raising children in that same space.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of times when our kids really hated that I do what I do and did what I did. Then I think they appreciated it in the moment. Like, they did not like it. They didn't understand it. And how do you communicate with small kids that you just, there's really not language to communicate the reason why you're saying we're going to do it this way. But now that they're older, they totally get it. It was so funny. Gabrielle said something last week. And she said, she's taking organic chemistry. She's like, I was sitting in class and I finally realized why you say no to mouthwash. And she's like, now I know the science behind it. And I was like, well, I'm glad it has finally aha'd you and you'll stop fighting me on it.
Right. Well, I mean, she has struggled with.
Yeah, she has, but
issues,
but, it was just funny because, it took her being in college for, 2 years, taking a ridiculously hard chemistry class to finally go, I get it.
So next 10 years, looking forward.
Oh, gosh.
You're able to look back at all those things, right? I've been there for all those decades, all but really a little over 1.5 of them. So you said you're starting to see a picture. You said we have been through the seasons of corners and edges, and you're starting to see the picture. What's 10 years look like? The next decade. Wow. That way, 10 years from now, we can play this episode and see how much of a Nostradamus you are.
I won't wear that hat. So next 10 years, what do I think? So we'll be empty nesters by the end of my next decade of life. Yep. That'll be fun.
Well, let's hope. I think it'll be fun.
I think it'll be fun.
In all reality, in the next 10 years, we could be grandparents.
Could. Not rushing
We're not rushing it, but that could be a thing.
Yeah.
But for sure, I feel like for sure empty nesters.
I think the venture that we're starting on right now, we'll have to talk about that at a later date when everything is final.
Solidified.
Yeah. And I'm not unpacking boxes. I see that as being very integral in the day-to-day here at the stores, the day-to-day in that space on its own, and then for other things that we've talked about and we've kind of got on our dream bucket list. So I see everything that has come to this point just really getting good roots and bearing fruit.
I agree. I mean, if I had to go back and look at this, look at your, like, this is not me looking back at mine, but looking at yours from the outside looking in, which is odd to say because I've been an integral part of all of it, meaning beside you for all of it. Being able to watch your life from the outside in, not our life, but yours. I'd have to say for sure I can see the edges building a picture, you being more confident and secure in what you offer to the space, whatever space that is, any space that you're in, and being able to step out in faith in that. We talked about you moving an office and taking over more expense, and
And I am so risk averse. It is so outside of my comfort zone to do any of those things.
But and I told my guys last weekend when we were together, I said, if you knew how much of a hard thing it was for you to be this, okay, I'm making a statement of faith and stepping out with a larger risk, and because you're, like you said, risk averse, but I think it comes from a confidence of what you offer, right, and your ability to communicate that now and have a platform to communicate it now. So I can start to see the picture come together. Yeah. And the neat thing about it for me is, we talked about this. We talked about the kids, the decades that the kids were born, but seeing how much of a part they could play as an ancillary part of their life, maybe main part of their life, but there's going to be some type of involvement where they're a part of that big picture, So it's neat for me to see legacy being built that's outside of the automotive space, but integral to what we do. So it's pretty neat.
It's been interesting over the last, probably 10 days?
Yeah.
Ish. When, certain situations have come up and I've automatically been like, oh my gosh, I have a kid who can do that.
Right.
And then because their ability to do the things that, come to mind and that I need, like that is their gifting.
Right.
Like, so seeing it all play together is pretty cool.
It is cool. It is cool. It's neat to see how God puts pieces together, even when you birth them. Like, how cool is it to birth pieces of your puzzle, But then, if you look at the farm, I think Mom has that same feeling. Like, she sees some of the things we want to do at the farm and gets really excited about them because she wants to be a part of those things. Mm. And if I had to, maybe I should ask her, and I probably will, but say, how does it feel to know that what you feel like could be a part of this legacy, family part of the legacy, that the children that want to do it, it's in their gifting, and the grandchildren that want to do it, it's in their gifting. So like, as much as it was on your heart,
right,
God knew years ago as he's putting these children on the planet, right, that they're going to grow up and have a gifting that's going to serve a purpose inside of that thing that's kind of been like marinating in the back all this time.
Marinating is probably a really good word. Just now it's going to have to come out of the fridge at some point.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely going to come out of the fridge. So.
But yeah.
Any final thoughts for anybody out there that's in any one of those decades? The majority of the people that listen to this are in that late 20s to early 40s decade, from what we can see.
You can't be beaten if you don't give up.
That's a good one.
And I think the reason that sticks in my head so much is because how many people quit right before their breakthrough?
Right. That whole 3 feet from goal is a real thing.
It is. And I think about, when we moved, when I was in graduate school at, 22, if I had quit then, how many people who need only what I can offer would miss out?
Right.
Because I quit. Because I didn't have the fortitude to not let circumstances dictate my future.
Yeah. That's good. I'm glad you didn't quit.
I'm sure you are. So I want to turn.
I'm glad you didn't quit on a million different fronts.
Yeah. So I was going to turn it back on you. What were your highlights of each of those decades? If you had to look back.
Oh, I'd have to do that. We'd have to do a whole episode.
No.
You know, I can't.
Just, quickly.
Quick?
Yeah, quick.
Oh, like my highlights watching you from the outside, or my personal highlights?
No, like what are the things that stick out in your mind?
So I didn't know you for the first 10.
We technically really didn't know me for the second 10 either.
Well, I knew you for one of them. I knew you for your 19th year.
Half of it.
And the highlight of that is literally the night that we had our first long conversation. Like, if I had to take one night or one day or one moment or anything, it's the very first conversation we ever had would be my highlight of your second 10 years. Is that what you're asking me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think a highlight moment from your 20 to 30 would be you telling me you were pregnant. Because of the way it came about, and we've talked about it on here, we didn't know that we could have kids, and that was just a big unknown because of my cancer, and that, what are you doing? Tuesday afternoon conversation to go to the doctor, and then immediately started to cry. I don't know how to be a mom. And I think if you look back, you've done a pretty damn good job of that. And I mean, Gabrielle has to fall into that because she was born inside that decade.
I was 30.
30 years. Like, okay, well, I'm including the 30th.
Okay.
I think that 30 to 40, I actually enjoyed watching you compete. A lot, actually. And not because of the physical beauty that came from it, but to watching you do the work. I know I never talked to you about that because you said I didn't encourage you enough in that. But to see your tenacity and your drive and your ability to juggle competing with kids, with all the things, it was inspiring to watch in that decade. From 40, that's 20, 30. So 40 to 50, I've told you this plenty. Watching you go after what you told me you wanted in that first conversation, because you told me then, I want doctor. I want to be a doctor, and we had a whole episode about that. But when you first mentioned master's degree, I don't even think doctorate came up. I think it was about a year into your master's, because you did master's quick. You were done in master's in
18 months.
Yeah, less than 2 years. But very quickly into that, or maybe because it was so quick, it's hard to tell whether it was quick into that or right before it ended or whatever, but it wasn't long into that process you started talking about doctorate. And then to see it become something different, because it was about using a biblical basis to what you do. That was really cool to watch. So yeah, you stepping into what I consider to be one of your gifts, and develop it in a way that you knew it was going to have impact in a way that would glorify God. Like I think, yeah, that's it. I mean, that's you stepping into what He gave you. Would be 40 to 50. Any that surprise you? Cool. I pray to send you. Want to pray us out?
Sure. Lord, thank you for giving us an opportunity to just sit and reminisce over a lot of years and a lot of life, and really just being able to just see how things fit together as we get to the point where we're deployed. Just keep us mindful of the privilege of working in what you gave us to do every day. Amen.
Amen. Thank y'all.